Victoria Pearson, but you can call me V, and yes, usually on this vlog I am Little Miss Happy Fun Times, where we talk all the positivity and all that sort of business, but it's Monday, it's early February, it's raining, it's miserable. I'm going to reset the kitchen, ready for the week, and I'm going to tell you about the worst experience of my entire life. So that's something everyone can enjoy. So it is very nearly Valentine's Day, and everywhere I look at the moment there are hearts. There's heart frames for photos on Facebook, there's hearts in hashtags on Twitter, there are heart stickers coming up as options on every app that you can imagine. There's hearts all over the high street. But hearts don't automatically make me think of love anymore. For any parent who's experienced what I have, hearts have a very different association. CHD, congenital heart disease. Now, February generally contains CHD Awareness Week, and 15 years ago, I couldn't have told you what CHD stood for, such was my lack of awareness. Now I could bore you about congenital heart disease for hours. I won't here though, honestly. I was expecting my third child, who was a surprise but a very welcome one. My first two children had been textbook pregnancies, easy deliveries resulting in chubby, healthy, pink little babies. So we skipped into that 20-week anomaly scan, which I can't say that word, with our toddler in tow, very excited to find out if we would be blessed with a little boy or a little girl. We're chatting away with the sonographer about what baby's siblings were hoping for and how different it would be this time now there isn't a big gap between my babies, because I had a 5-year gap between the first two, and we talked about what a beautiful day it was outside. Then she went quiet. I asked if everything was okay, and she told me that she was having problems getting a clear view of baby's heart and that she might need to get someone else in to have a look. Now, I could tell she was lying, so I turned my face to the screen. I don't know if you've ever seen an ultrasound scan, but when you look at an unborn baby's heart in the 4-chamber view, it's supposed to look a bit like a circle with a cross in it. My baby's heart looked like 3/4 of a circle with a cross in it, with the final quarter, instead of it being a smooth curve around, was all bubbly like a blackberry. Every beat and pulse of his little heart looked strained, causing the blackberry quarter to bulge out in odd directions. "There's something wrong with his heart," I said, putting the sonographer in an awful position, I now know, because it isn't actually her job to break bad news. Protocol dictates that she calls in a consultant who will then have a look and explain that you need a referral to a specialist. But she wasn't allowed to just lie to me either. She asked me what made me say that, and I pointed and said that looks wrong. She told me she wasn't quite sure, and she went to get the consultant. Now all that joy just drained out of the room, and it left a thick, heavy silence that even our toddler didn't break. The consultant referred us to the Evelina Children's Hospital in London for a fetal cardiology scan, and we got to go the next day. It was a very different experience to a normal anomaly scan. During that type of scan, there's no speaking at all. The consultant has to focus completely on measuring every tiny bit of the baby's minuscule little heart. Afterwards, we were taken to what we now think of as the bad news room. The bad news room is tiny, just enough space for 4 chairs and a low table with a very conspicuous box of tissues on it, and a less conspicuous stack of cardboard bowls, presumably there in case the news makes you vomit. I didn't really react at all as they told me that my son had 2 problems with his heart: coarctation of the aorta and an AVSD. That's an atrial ventricular septal defect. I think I'm saying that properly. I was still in shock at that time, I think. I felt weirdly calm and detached. This consultant sketched out a diagram of a healthy heart, and then he drew a diagram of my baby's. The coarctation meant that my baby's aorta, which would, after he was born, supply the lower half of his body with oxygenated blood, had a narrowing which would stop it being able to function. The AVSD part meant that he had 2 holes in his heart, one either side of the valve. The consultant explained that my son's collection of defects was fixable on its own, with a fair success rate, but that it was very rare for someone to suffer those defects without also having a severe life-limiting chromosome disorder. If he had the chromosomal issue that they suspected, his chances of surviving open heart surgery would plummet to about 2%, with an even slimmer chance that he would see his first birthday regardless of surgeries. They gently let me know that, despite the late stage of my pregnancy, I was 23 weeks at that point, ending the pregnancy was an option. I had no idea what that would involve, so they explained that a termination at that stage would involve giving birth to my baby after a needle had been passed into his heart to stop it from beating. We opted for an amniocentesis to tell us exactly what we were looking for before we made the decision. By this point, I was 23 weeks pregnant. I had a very definite bump, lots of people asking me about my baby, and I had a very active kicking baby in there. Every time he kicked me, my heart broke all over again. My baby had a name, he had siblings, he had family that loved him already, and every time he kicked, I was reminded that I might have to plan his funeral. An amniocentesis is a very uncomfortable procedure, which involves a long hollow needle being passed through the stomach into the womb to remove a tiny little bit of the amniotic fluid for testing. During that test, there's also another detailed scan where measurements are taken of baby's nose, limbs, and the fold of skin at the back of the baby's neck. That helps them to point to whether it's likely that your baby will have a chromosome disorder, but it isn't a guarantee. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen during that scan. I just kept thinking, this might be my only chance to see my baby alive. At one point, he reached his tiny fist up towards the cold jelly on my stomach, opened his hand and closed it again. I felt like he was waving to me. I know he wasn't, but it felt like he was saying, "I'm fine, Mum, just you wait and see." The doctor told me that what he had seen had been encouraging, but there was no guarantee of a healthy baby and I would have to wait a week for the results. Longest week of my life. He also told me that he would be prepared to perform a termination for the good of the child if my son had the chromosome disorder they suspected, which is described as being incompatible with life. Later I'd go on to meet a child that had that same chromosome disorder. She lived for 3 days in agonising pain, wasn't able to feed or be held in that time. I'll never ever forget her. You know how slowly time goes in the last hour before you finish work? Well, the next week passed exactly like that. A fog of guilt and trying to be cheery around the other children, crying in desperate, secretive little bursts in the bathroom. It doesn't matter how many medical professionals tell you that there's no known cause, it's nothing you did, it's just one of those things. As a mum, the guilt shreds your soul even if you haven't done anything wrong. A week later, I got the phone call that had my legs turned to jelly and collapsed beneath me. A kindly nurse that called me to say that there was no chromosomal anomaly detected. I made her repeat that 4 times, which in hindsight was mean because that's hard to say. Our baby was, quote, just facing a complex heart defect. He had a 70% chance of surviving both operations. He had a chance. I was induced 2 weeks before my due date in the Evelina Children's Hospital, where there was a whole team of experts in tiny hearts. I am so unbelievably lucky that we live in a country that has free healthcare. In countries where they don't, my son's operations alone can cost over $1 million, and that's without the costs associated for delivery and aftercare. I didn't have to worry about any of that. I could focus on being there for my baby boy, learning all I could about his condition, and giving him what care I could, like mouth care after surgery. At 9 days old, my son had his first operation, the coarctation repair. They cut either side of the obstruction in his aorta and reattached the ends, discarding the piece with the narrowing. Unbelievably to me, a week later he was home. He was a tiny, fragile little thing that fed constantly because his body needed so many extra calories just to keep his broken heart beating, but he was alive. For a little while, he almost thrived. Then he started to lose weight. Not just a little bit. He went so far off the growth chart that they had to add paper at the bottom of it. He started regularly projectile vomiting, and I mean projectile, he could hit something 10 feet away. His breathing was laboured, his eyes were sunken, his skin was an ashy grey blue. I look back at pictures of him now and think, how did I not see how sick he was? But to me, he was always just perfect. He kept on determinedly smiling as I cut out every known allergen out of my diet in case my milk was making him sick, and I woke him hourly to feed him. We introduced prescription high-energy milk into his diet, dripping it into his mouth with a syringe because he just didn't have the energy to suck. I was terrified that he was vomiting up too much of his heart meds to survive. When our appointment at the Evelina came around, we were given more bad news. Baby was failing to thrive because he was in heart failure. One of his holes had begun to close by itself, but that wasn't a good thing. The two had been balancing each other out. If he didn't have his operation soon, he might die. We weren't expecting it so soon. We'd hoped that he would be between 3 and 5 before he would need his main heart repair. His heart was the size of a walnut and would still be beating while they were sewing patches on to cover the holes. My son was 7 months old when he went down for surgery on my birthday. The longest 6 hours of my life followed. We tried to distract ourselves, but mostly we just hung around the hospital grounds with me clutching his little blanket like a crazy person. And when we finally got the call to say that he was in recovery, we sprinted to paediatric intensive care unit. When we arrived, they were having troubles rousing him from the anaesthetic. Panic gripped me again. Could we really have come so far just for him to fall at this hurdle? I laid my hand on his tiny head and said, "Hey, little man, Mummy's here now." And he opened his eyes and looked at me. A miracle. Now, we had our dramas in the days that followed. He developed a tolerance to morphine that would not be sedated. He could only relax and lie still when he was in my arms. Mummy morphine, the nurse called it. He had something called an SVT. It was so long ago I couldn't tell you what that stands for now. But it meant that his heart sped up dramatically and he had to have yet another new medicine. But we got through that. Within days of his operation, he was pink and able to breathe properly. He was no longer so weak that he could barely drink. He was now suddenly hoovering up solids like they were going out of fashion. 2 weeks later, we took him home for the last time. Fast forward 15 or so years, and you would never ever know, except for his telltale scar, that there was anything ever wrong with my boy. He hasn't been on any medications for years and years and years, and now he goes for a checkup roughly every 2 years. They may even decide that he doesn't need to be seen every 2 years now that he's moving into adult care. For all intents and purposes, he has a fully functioning and healthy heart now. He's in a mainstream school and participates in a wide range of sports. He used to do kickboxing, he loves swimming, and he's really into skateboarding. He's an unstoppable dynamo. His energy and infectious happiness light up rooms. We got our happy ending. But on Valentine's Day, when hearts are everywhere, I'm taken back to that dark time and I think about it. And my own heart breaks for those who didn't get their happy ending. Thank you so much for joining me through that. I know it wasn't the normal positive kind of content that you follow me for, but it is a story that I felt the need to tell. And to be honest, I learned a lot from that experience. I learned that you don't know how strong you are until you are put to the test on it. And I learned that also other ends were. I'm so grateful and thankful for our NHS. They were brilliant with us both throughout that. Not just my son, who was their only patient, but also with me. They were ever so comforting, ever so nice. They looked after me. I was having a lot of problems getting hold of financial support that I was supposed to be getting hold of. They supported me through that as well and shouted at people on my behalf. And they were just fantastic. Could not fault them. We were so, so lucky to have them. Now, like I said, this isn't my normal kind of content. And so next week, I promise you, we're going to be a lot more chirpy, a lot more cheerful, a lot less gloomy. I'm going to be doing some Monday motivation with you, 6 a.m. UK time on my weekly vlog. And we are going to do some simple stretching together, tiny little bit of cardio in there. Complete no equipment workout that literally anybody can do, even me. And so if I can, you definitely can. Come and have a go. Just have a little try on it and see how it makes you feel. See if it sets your week up off to a good start. If you can't wait to see me till then, I understand. You can check me out every day on the shorts for my daily gratitude. I love telling you what I feel grateful for, because noticing those little things that you're grateful for, all of a sudden the big things just start happening all by themselves. So I love that. I'm also here on a Tuesday to check in with my little terrarium, let you know how it's going. Touch wood, hasn't gone mouldy yet at time of filming. You never know, when it actually goes out it might have done. Until then, you have yourself a magical, magical week.